dirty water. The villager with the umbrella obviously didn't trust the weather forecast. We had some very good footballers in the regiment and also fine rugby players, including Harry McKibben, the Irish international. The problem with these games played on an extended paddy field was the hardness of the ground in the dry season, which could cause quite serious injury to the players. A heavy tackle might often result in broken bones, and the doctors were very concerned about these. In another encounter, the quartermaster was much more concerned about the certain ruining of his tabletop than with the possible future health of the rather unhappy target. The entertainment had been organised for us by the villagers, and against the backdrop of camouflage netting we saw some amazing feats. The burning ring had daggers pointing inwards, so any mistake could have proved unfortunate. Troops elsewhere seemed to have concert parties. We didn't until almost the end of the war, so we had to make our own fun with simple music and drama. As there were no Western women here, soldiers had to play their roles, and many hidden talents for acting, makeup and costume were revealed in these sketches. It gave us an interest for a while and made us think of home, which was always in our minds, since letters to Burma took about 6 weeks to arrive. Snakes were a great problem in the jungle, and although we eventually learned how to deal with them, they still had to be treated with respect. So we were fascinated to see how a dangerous cobra could be controlled by the music of the snake charmer and by the rhythmic movement of his knee, at least for some of the time. Having contracted a very severe form of malaria, I, with others, was sent off to Calcutta for rest and recovery. The war still had not greatly affected the city, although the Victoria Memorial on the Maidan was now painted black to make it less visible to Japanese bombers. Beside the law courts in the centre of the city was a very fine swimming pool which we were allowed to use. But full recovery often required travel north from the steamy coast towards the higher and cooler parts of India. One of our batteries was situated in the little principality of Tipperah, ruled by a Maharaja who was thoroughly pro-British and very kind to the troops. His palace, which at one time had been magnificent, was now very run down. We didn't know it at the time, but we were seeing the end of empire. Within a few years, India would become independent. Princes would lose most of their powers, and the country would be split along religious lines with the creation of the divided country of Pakistan. But for now, everything continued much as before, with weekly markets held in the faded grandeur of the amphitheatre. About 60 miles from Mount Everest in the Himalayas is Darjeeling, surrounded by tea plantations and looking like a scene in the Swiss Alps. The cool, dry atmosphere here had been renowned for working wonders against the symptoms of malaria, and so it proved to be. Another wonderful place visited was the Dal Lake, 5,000 feet up in the hills of Kashmir. This idyllic spot, with its colourful houseboats, had been a favourite holiday resort in peacetime. Life here was inexpensive, but the service excellent, with gracious decorum from numerous servants and all provisions brought in by boat right to the door. The lake was stocked with trout and was ideal also for water sports. I experienced here the exhilaration of high-speed waterboarding, an earlier and more exciting form of water skiing. It's very sad to think that this beautiful area is now torn apart by religious and ethnic conflict. In 1945 we went to Madras to re-equip for further service. With its neat shops and its Anglican church, it looked just like an English provincial town, but behind the facade it was totally Indian. There was no longer any risk to this vast country of an invasion from the east, as the 14th Army had deterred their advance, and the Japanese generals were now starting to draw back their troops for a last-ditch defense of the homeland. Soon after the atomic bomb attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in early August, the Japanese surrendered unconditionally, and suddenly we were on our way home aboard the Belfast-built Stirling Castle. The Suez Canal was now open, so avoiding the 6-week journey by way of the South Atlantic, which we had on the way out. Running parallel to the huge sea level canal linking the Red Sea with the Mediterranean, we saw the Sweetwater Canal, the railway carrying the White Nile trains, and the Nile itself shimmering in the distance. We passed alongside an Italian prisoner of war camp on our approach-to-port side. Here we saw another Belfast-built ship, Andes, taking on thousands of troops for repatriation. Every square foot of space in these ships was occupied by people displaced by war. Now, at last, they had the chance to return home and pick up their lives. Out beyond the busy docks and waterfront of port side, near to where the canal meets the Mediterranean, we saw the famous statue of the Frenchman Ferdinand de Lesseps, designer of the canal. Then our packed ship gathered speed as we turned westward towards Gibraltar. Many sporting events were organised to keep us occupied. Running 8 times round the deck made a mile, and boxing matches were very popular. The boxer in the white shorts is Norman Brann, later Lord Lieutenant of County Down. Others to become well known were Robin Kinnan, a Lord Mayor of Belfast, David Holden, a head of the Northern Ireland Civil Service, Maurice Gabby, the international bridge player, and many more. For our tug-of-war, the rope had to pass round a bollard due to lack of deck space. Someone on a losing team cheated and firmly tied the end of the rope to the ship. On board, returning from Australia, were a few English nurses who brightened the scene and inspired us to greater competition in our sports. During our first year in Burma, we wore shoulder topies. We hated them. So now was the chance to get rid of them forever. As the blue skies turned to grey, we knew that we were nearly home. Off the Mersey, a pilot came on board, and the tugs took us in tow into Liverpool. The Birkenhead ferry looked like something on the Hooghly River, but we were so glad to see the misty liver buildings again and be back in a familiar port, even if the welcoming committee was rather thin on the ground. As soon as possible, we were boarding another ship at Stranraer. Here we saw a great emblem of success in the European war, as dozens of German U-boats awaited their appropriate final destruction by scuttling in the Atlantic. Our ship, the St. Sorrel, approached Larne Harbour, where even out in the bay we could see that the welcome was going to be very different to the one in Liverpool. Hundreds of people, wives, sweethearts, relatives and friends, had gathered together on the quayside to welcome us home. Our service and sacrifice in Burma was praised by the Prime Minister Sir Basil Brooke, and our own popular Colonel Cunningham spoke to us movingly of all we had achieved. A specially decorated train took us from Larne to Belfast, with a hero's welcome all the way. And so we paraded through our own city with our heads held high, led by Colonel Cunningham, past the City Hall in the fresh autumn sunshine. We had achieved what we set out to do, and were glad to be back. But the day was also tinged with sadness for our friends who didn't make it, and for their families. A memorial to their sacrifice was later unveiled in St. Anne's Cathedral in Belfast. When you go home, tell them of us and say, "For your tomorrow, we gave our today." We'd all been through a lot together. Now it was at an end. The 12-mile snipers were home.